I had written this story some years ago. It is called The Debt, and it was published in an anthology of English fiction from Bangladesh called From the Delta in 2005. Here is the story. The Debt. I had hardly known Majid when we were classmates at university. He always sat at the front of the room, and as was the norm for students attending university lectures in those days, rarely spoke up in class. My own seat was at the back, where I could freely daydream, doodle, or exchange notes with Karim. Outside the classroom, I had my own set of friends, and apart from Karim, saw little of any of my fellow students. There were few social events involving the class, though there is a photo of our group at a rare picnic organized the year we graduated. The girls are in their saris, posing demurely in the front of the picture. Karim and I are predictably at the back, the contrast between us quite striking. He being as round and short as I was then skinny and tall. Majid is in the middle row, off to one side. He is dressed in a white open-collared shirt and white pants, looking as though he is just about to go on to the cricket field. He has a slight smile on his broad and handsome face. At the time, Majid could have been no more than 19 or 20, but there is just the suggestion of a receding hairline. There is another photograph, a faded one of Majid and me in a dramatized play reading that had been organized by the department. We are dressed in ridiculous costumes and are both sporting absurdly large and stylish moustaches. The one-act play, based on some imaginary episode in the career of Tipu Sultan, had been penned by one of the younger teachers in the department. All I remember now is a great deal of posturing and long-winded speeches. Majid and I, however, had no more than 1 or 2 lines each. All in all, there was little in common between us, and only once can I recall a moment in which it might be said there was a point of real connection. I was representing Salimullah Hall in some race, and as I rounded the track, struggling to stay abreast with another runner, I caught a glimpse of him off to one side. He came over to me at the end of the race, and I knew that as I had fought my way toward the finish line, he too had been struggling with me, willing me to pass the other runner with every ounce of his being. After I graduated, I did not see Majid for some years. I spent some time studying accounting and entered the family business. Over a period of time, I acquired a new circle of friends, and even Karim I hardly saw at all. When Majid showed up at my office one day, it was a surprise. He had not changed much, though his hair was thinner than I remembered. He came to the point right away. His sister was to be married, and his family was having some difficulty meeting the expenses. In addition, the bridegroom's family had increased their dowry expectations. Majid wondered if it would be possible for me to lend him 5,000 rupees. He would pay me back as soon as he was able. At that time, 5,000 rupees amounted to about 3 months of my income. On the principle that one should be only willing to loan an amount that one could really afford to lose, I offered Majid a loan of half the amount, and in the end Majid gratefully accepted my cheque for 2,500. As he left, he assured me that he would be paying me back as soon as things settled after the wedding. A year or so passed, and I had not heard from Majid. I had no idea where he lived, but found out his address from a common acquaintance. When I called on him, he apologized profusely for not having been in touch. It turned out that the wedding expenses were a lot more than they had expected. Also, things had not been going well for him in his business, and he was not at the moment in a position to return the loan. As soon as things improved, he would pay me back. He wanted me to know how grateful he was and how his whole family was beholden to me. I had saved them all from certain disgrace, and he didn't know how they could ever really repay me. More time elapsed, and there was no word from him. Once I ran into him at the little shop by the stadium where I would frequently stop for a Coke and a pan. He was dressed in white, but it was not the spotless, immaculate white that is commemorated in the picnic photograph. He was smoking a cigarette in what I remember was a characteristic way of his. He held his cigarette in his closed fist at the base of his fingers and pulled away at it noisily and deeply through the opening between his curled first finger and thumb. We talked briefly, but he did not mention the money that he owed me, and for some reason I could not bring myself to say anything about it. I went to see him once before I left Dhaka to look after the family's business interests in London. He was no longer at the address where I had called on him previously. The people who lived there mentioned that he had gone back to live in his village. I put the whole business out of my head and decided that it was no longer worth pursuing. Money, it is said, is like the dirt on one's palm. You collected it, it washed off, it came back. When I returned from England 3 years later, I don't know why, I brought up the subject of the unpaid loan when I met Karim for coffee at the Intercon. "Well, it is now a certainty," said Karim, "that the loan will remain unpaid." "What do you mean?" "Majid is dead," he replied. It had happened 2 years ago. The bridegroom's financial demands had continued after the marriage. Majid's sister had been subjected to verbal and physical maltreatment. Majid had gone to his brother-in-law's village and attempted to take her away with him. The bridegroom's men had caught up with him at the river bank. There had been a struggle involving supporters on both sides. In the confusion, someone had drawn a knife and stabbed Majid. I thought back to that afternoon that he had come to see me in my office. How could he have known that he was setting in motion a series of events that would one day end with him bleeding his life out on the bottom of a boat?